Good evening and welcome to our District 5 Redistricting Workshop here at the Rancho Cordova Library. We are very excited to be here tonight. My name is Courtney Bailey Canellis. I am the Registrar of Voters for Sacramento County elections, and we are here to talk about redistricting, redrawing those district lines in the County of Sacramento for our Board of Supervisor districts, and we are very excited to be joined tonight with Doug Yoakum from our Demographers National Demographics Corporation, who will be providing an overview on what redistricting is, why it's important, and how our public can participate. And also our very special guest, everyone's favorite supervisor, Supervisor Natoli. I can say that he's not running for re-election next year, so I can say that. So we're very excited for the supervisor to be here. As someone who's been through redistricting before, your input, supervisor, is very valuable. The questions you have and also the questions and comments from our voters, our community, on why this process is important. So we're very excited to be here tonight. Supervisor, do you have any opening remarks you would like to make?
Okay. Well, thanks, Courtney, and certainly welcome to all who've joined us here in person, but all those that are following us via Zoom and over the internet. I want to first express thanks to Courtney and to Doug for their efforts, but certainly to our technical staff, many of you in the room here this evening that have set up the room accordingly to make sure it's available to folks remotely. And I just want to applaud your efforts, and I know that you're doing this throughout the county and the supervisors' districts, and it's very important. It's a very important process to, it has to be accomplished every 10 years, but I want to just thank all of our staff for their good work. So again, thank you for allowing me to join you this evening. I would just note that, as Courtney had said, that I see familiar faces in the audience this evening, I'm sure others that are tuned in, that over my terms of service with the county, certainly as a supervisor, but prior to that, I think this is actually the fifth time around for at least being close to the redistricting process. And District 5, as those that are aware, if you have a map before you or certainly knowledgeable, is the largest geographically. It's certainly been one of the most rapidly growing districts over the course of my tenure with the county. It includes, obviously, the cities of Rancho Cordova, unincorporated area communities of Rosemont and Butterfield Riviera, Independence of Mather and Vineyard area, City of Elk Grove, Galt, Isleton, and many rural areas throughout the southern part of the county, including in the Delta and out in the Slough House and Harold and Wilton areas. And it's unique in its geographical makeup, obviously, certainly in its neighborhoods and its business districts. And it's really important that we're here this evening to talk about how the district will look for the next 10 years. That'll be a decision, as Courtney will go through, that'll be made by the Board of Supervisors before the end of the calendar year, and sets the stage, obviously, for representation in those who will elect their representatives over the course of that 10-year period until the next cycle in 2031. So with that, I want to just thank you for all being here. Certainly want to hear your comments and suggestions, and there's a number of elements that go into redistricting. Some have changed from the last time we did this, and some of you were here in 2011 or certainly in the process and even before that. So I want to thank you for your interest, and the engagement by you that are here and those that are tuned in is very, very important to the outcome. So look forward to any comments and questions, and with that, I'm going to turn it back to Courtney so she can help walk through the order of business for this evening. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Supervisor. Well, and I hope even though you might not be a supervisor, in 10 years, you still, I hope to see you at some of these meetings. So
Okay.
You could set the record for redistricting meetings.
Thanks, Courtney.
So, and also, as the supervisor mentioned, that being in District 5, the fastest growing district, we are going to see a lot of changes. And how that's going to end up looking is really going to be dependent on what the voters, what the constituents have to say. So really appreciate everyone's participation. I'm going to go ahead and read a few announcements on how to participate in this meeting. We have a few different options as we have this hybrid in-person / virtual event happening, so please bear with me. The county is hosting this in-person / virtual public workshop to provide an overview of the redistricting process and give a demonstration of the mapping tools to allow for community input. Public input is vital to a successful redistricting project, so we want to make sure we allow for plenty of time for public comment and to ask questions. Doug with National Demographics Corporation will give a presentation for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will have a video, and then we will open it up for public comments. Community members can make comments in person, by phone, or submit comments through the Zoom Q&A feature. It is important to note that any phone comments or questions or comments submitted through Zoom or in person are all part of the official public record. We will start with in-person comments first, then we will move to the phone line, and then we will review the Zoom Q&A feature. And we will circle through to make sure that we hit all questions and comments. To make a public comment by phone during tonight's presentation, please dial 916-875-2500 and choose option number 1, then follow the prompts to be placed in the queue. You may be on hold for an extended period, and your patience is appreciated. I will ask staff to transfer caller into the workshop, and the caller will have 3 minutes to provide input. The chat feature in Zoom will not be available, but participants can use the Q&A feature, and I will read those questions out loud as they come through. Language interpretation services are available for all languages. Please call the public comment phone line at 916-875-2500, and staff will connect you with a language interpreter. You and the language interpreter will be transferred into the workshop to make a comment. Additional time will be given to callers who are using language interpretation services. There will also be an American Sign Language interpreter visible on your screen. Please be mindful of the time limits to avoid being interrupted or disconnected, and we may consider more time. It all depends on participation and how many questions are in the queue. We appreciate your patience and understanding, and we hope to hear from you, especially after we hear from Doug tonight on what it is, why it's important, and how the public can participate. So now I will go ahead and turn it over to Doug with National Demographics Corporation. This is a consulting group that the County of Sacramento hired through a competitive bidding process to help us with our redistricting efforts. So as the supervisor mentioned, the board does make the final decisions on those district boundaries, but we have folks like Doug, our consultants, to help come up with proposed maps based on public input and feedback. So very excited to be here with Doug, and take it away, sir.
Thank you, Courtney, for our, is it our third go-around now? Yeah, it's our third go-around? Fourth?
Yeah.
All right. Losing track.
You're doing a lot of redistricting projects. It makes sense, yeah.
Our company is very busy. My name is Doug Yoakum with National Demographics Corporation. I am with a company that's based out of Sacramento, but I'm not a foreigner. I live here in Elk Grove, and so I know a little bit about what Sacramento looks like and how districting has gone in the past. And I'm here to help the supervisors, the staff, and the public participate in this process. So I will make a quick presentation here, hopefully no more than 15 minutes. And there it is. It's here. Thank you. There we go. I'll quickly go through the schedule that we've decided upon. We're well into it by now. We had 2 virtual workshops early in late June. Now we're in the process of holding workshops in each supervisory district. August 10th was our second official board hearing, where we again went over the process again and heard from some members of the public about what they thought, what neighborhoods should be considered in redistricting. We've had the Census Bureau release of the data, August 12th. And now the official redistricting data is being processed by the statewide database, which is an entity of the state legislature. They provide it for the state commission that does redistricting for congressional, Senate, and assembly seats. And that is the data that the law requires all cities and counties and special districts and school districts to use when they draw districts. So that process is expected to be completed by the middle to end of September, and then we will have actual data, the real data that we can use to do redistricting in Sacramento County. We've established a deadline of October 15th for folks to go online, look at and get the mapping tools that I'll describe in a minute, and actually help us draw districts. Then the board will have a third official hearing on November 2nd to look at those maps and decide how some of the lines are going to start going. And then November 16th is the final fourth hearing for redistricting, and hopefully they will adopt a map at that point, and then start the process of putting it either into resolution form or an ordinance to adopt finally, and at their December 7th meeting. And December 15th is the statutory deadline that the state has imposed upon counties and all entities that have November 2022 elections to finish this process, so folks like Courtney can get all the lines in the computers and decide on precincts and all these wonderful things. So that's why the December 15th deadline is so early. I'd like to explain to you what some of the laws are that the Board of Supervisors has to follow. Hopefully folks who are drawing plans and ideas of how to do redistricting can conform to some of these rules as well. We have to follow the federal law, which is, of course, number one, each district must be substantially equal, one to the other. That's the purpose of redistricting, is to rearrange the populations and the lines of each district so that they are relatively equal, and no one district has more political power than another. So equal population is the absolute first rule. The second one is we have to follow the Federal Voting Rights Act. And that means that we cannot discriminate against a protected class of voters by dividing them or combining them in a way that deprives them of their opportunity to elect a candidate of their choice. That's basically a statement that says you cannot racially gerrymander districts by dividing or uniting communities in ways that deprive them of their opportunity to elect folks. Then we have California rules, which were enacted by the new law called the Fair Maps Act. Each district must be geographically contiguous. In other words, it's connected to each other. Districts have to be connected to each other, to itself, so that there's not some part way off in some other part of the county and one part in a different part of the county. So they have to be together. We have to endeavor to not divide neighborhoods and communities of interest. And by communities of interest, we mean, by neighborhoods, we mean anything that a local group of folks come to us and say, this is our neighborhood, this is how we define our neighborhood, and I'll explain that a little bit more thoroughly in a moment. Same with community of interest. It's different in that a community of folks has a socio or economic interest in a geographic area and an interest in keeping that area together so that it can be better represented on the Board of Supervisors. To the extent possible, we are required to keep cities and census-designated places, CDPs, together. Rancho Cordova, of course, is a city. We are supposed to the extent possible, while still complying with equal population, keep cities like Rancho Cordova and Folsom within one district. City census-designated places it's the same requirement, but I'll give you an example. Orangevale is a census-designated place. Herald is a census-designated place. Elk Grove is a city, but I can't come up with the place right next to Elk Grove. Just left my head. Vineyard. The vineyard area is considered a census-designated place.
Right.
So It's clear. Some people, some areas are cities, some are designated places, but we're required to keep them together to the extent that we can. We're required to use easily identifiable boundaries, such as major roads, highways, freeways, natural boundaries such as creeks or rivers, so that when someone is looking at a map, people can easily understand where the district lines lie, so that they don't meander through neighborhoods and make it confusing as to whether or not a person can figure out which district they're actually in. So we're going to follow, to the extent possible, easily identifiable district boundaries. And they must be compact. And that is defined by saying that you cannot bypass a large group of people in order to get to another large group of people. That's the definition that's in state law. There is only one prohibition in state law when you are drawing districts, and that is you cannot favor or discriminate against a political party. Now, there are some other traditional redistricting principles that are often used in redistricting, and we may use them here. One of them is preventing a large number of voters from being shifted between a district that has an election in 2022 into one that has an election in 2024. When I worked for the Senate, we call that deferral, where you have supervisors have 4-year terms, and three of them are elected in 1 year and 2 of them are elected in the other year. To the extent that possible, we want to prevent moving a lot of people who are expecting a 2022 election into a district that has a 2024 election. That would be depriving them for 2 years of representation. They would still be represented by the folks that they elected 4 years earlier, but to the extent possible, we'd like to keep folks in districts that have elections on schedule. You can also respect the voters' choices. In other words, when those voters have elected a supervisor for 4 years, and that supervisor is up again for re-election, to the extent possible, you don't want to put two supervisors or two supervisors in the same district with each other. That would deprive the supervisor of perhaps being allowed to run for re-election, but it deprives the voters that chose that person of the person that they elected. So if you choose, you can respect those kind of choices and continuity in office. You can also look at a district with future population growth and perhaps underpopulate that district and then overpopulate a district next to it. If you expect a district to have population growth over the next 10 years and you've planned for that growth, you can consider, like I said, underpopulating it, but that would require an overpopulated district either next door or somewhere else. So you don't want to go overboard on that by having large differences between districts as to population numbers, because equal population is the ultimate goal. But you can consider growth as part of your consideration. And you can also start from where you are. You have a set of existing districts now. You can start from there and simply adjust them if you so choose. But if you want to just throw everything up and start from scratch, you can do that too. So preserving the core of existing districts is also a principle that is often used and is allowed to be used. I say they're traditional because they are not prohibited and they are not required by law. This is a new slide we've implemented for this workshop because the Census Bureau came out with some numbers recently, and some folks have been able to interpret them because they came out in a form that's not readable by humans. It's machine readable. So a lot of folks are working on that now, like I said, at the statewide database. But the NDC made a population estimate way back in June when we were first brought on to this project. And the mapping tools that you see online right now are using those estimated numbers that we put together back at that time. So you can see on this chart the population that was where these districts were drawn back in 2010. Then this was our estimate of what those districts were where they are now, and at the bottom is the ideal number. In other words, if you take the total population of, let me get to it, 1.539 million, and divide it by 5, the ideal population for a district is 307,890. Now that estimate is going to change with the actual census numbers that come out in late September. But the purpose of this exercise was to give you an idea of where the districts are now. District 1 and 2 are relatively even. Over the course of 10 years, they grew as the county grew, and so they don't have a large deviation number at this time. District 3, based in Carmichael, did not grow as quickly, so they have a deficit of population. So that if you use its current formation, they will have to add people to it. Same with the District 4, which is Citrus Heights, Folsom. That area that district needs to gain some population. But like the supervisor said just a few moments ago, District 5 has seen the most growth in Sacramento County, and so it's significantly overpopulated. So if the other districts that need population would take from the 5th and add to it, or we could reconfigure things so that the areas of the 5th are added to the 4th and 3rd and 4th, and then the 5th would go somewhere else. That's what redistricting is. Redistricting is figuring out where these line goes so everybody ends up equal. I'd be happy to answer any questions on that at the end here. But what we're looking for tonight and in the near future is telling us what your neighborhood looks like, what is your neighborhood, and what is the reason its boundaries, and what is the reason it should be kept together in a redistricting plan, either kept in a current district or put in some other district. That's the kind of input we're looking for, and Courtney will explain to you in a moment a community of interest form that we've developed for that purpose. But neighborhoods are defined by natural boundaries, like I said, streets, rivers, streams. It can be something around a park or a school or other neighborhood landmarks. We would just like to hear from the public what they think their neighborhood is and how it should be treated in redistricting. And communities of interest are a little different. Like I said, they have social or economic interests that should be considered when putting together districts. An agricultural interest, an interest in housing or some transportation issue could be, if it unites a community, then that's a community of interest. And the state defines it as whether or not it should be included within a single district for purposes of its effective and fair representation. That's why we'd like to hear about communities of interest. Oh, let me go back one. And definitions of communities of interest may not include relationship with political party, an incumbent, or a political candidate. That's not a community of interest. It has to be social or economic, not political. So here's the phone number folks can call if they'd like to participate. And we'll talk a little bit about community of interest more, and then show you all a video.
Great, thank you so much, Doug. Doug, would you mind actually pulling up the community of interest form, please, and we can review that. We have a form template that we have to hopefully help communities let us know and respond to what they feel is important about their community. So we have this great form that's available on our website. We're also happy to make copies and distribute them to any community groups, neighborhood associations, so please feel free to contact us. And if we could just scroll down a little bit, this kind of gives an overview of what, got fast fingers, gives us a little bit of an overview of what it is, which Doug just covered. And these forms here, that's perfect. These forms are fillable. So these are available online, and you can fill out as much information as you would like. You can fill this out as a group, as a community-based organization, as a neighborhood, as a business, or you can fill it out as an individual or both. It's completely up to you. It's important to note that while we're doing the county redistricting efforts, there are also other redistricting efforts happening simultaneously on the state level, on the city level, different cities, as well as even our local districts. So this is specific to Sacramento County. However, if you submit your community of interest for any other redistricting effort, you can share the same thing with us, and we definitely want to see that as well. So don't feel like you have to fill out multiple forms. This form, it kind of talks about and hopefully prompts constituents to respond to what makes up their community of interest. So the first question says, my community is, and you want to think about who lives there, what do they have in common, housing in common, services in common, especially when we look at county services, and it could be anything from, public health to homelessness. It could be, depending on where you live in the county, it could be municipal services as well, where your kids go to school, where your parks are. All of those things are things we want to look at to make sure, again, we don't, to extent possible, divide any of those communities. There's also an area where you can fill out the physical boundaries that Doug was talking about on where your community is located. So maybe if you're not sure exactly what binds your community, but you know where kind of maybe some of the geographical boundaries are, especially around, Rancho Cordova with Sunrise and, kind of how far that goes. We definitely want to hear that as well. You can also share how your community is similar to the following neighborhoods or different to the following neighborhoods, and any community histories that might bind those communities together. So something I learned actually at our District 3 workshop, which I didn't realize, is we had a gentleman there that talked about the history and relationship between Fair Oaks and Gold River, and how they had a lot of common past business interests that bind them together. Of course, we know we also have common interests between Rancho Cordova and Gold River. And all three of those are represented by 3 different supervisors. So if you feel like those communities should be kept together, or they share common history that you want to make sure we consider, please use that form to complete that information and let us know, because I tell you, at each meeting I learn more and more about our community, so it's been really beneficial. So the community of interest form is an easy form to be able to participate. There are other ways as well. And Supervisor, did you have any questions?
No, I had a comment, Courtney, and it goes back, certainly, I think you've explained the community of interest, but Doug, as you were going through that, you put the slide up with the population numbers, and there'll be hard numbers that will be confirmed, as you said, in a few weeks. And you gave the target number, but I think with all the things that you rolled in that could be considered, including what Courtney was just elaborating on as to how folks see this, because it's not mentioned here, what is the allowable deviation? Your job is to help us get this close to that target number of 307,000. But then you put all those other factors, in which people are going to weigh in here this evening, hopefully, and others through the workshops. What is the law provide for? I don't know if you touched on that. If you did, I didn't. I think it might be important, because as people are kind of putting forth their ideas, looking at their community framework, and I recognize community leaders here from some of the areas that aren't in the incorporated portions of the county and such. I think they need to know that as they're trying to put forward a map, what's the allowable deviation from the numbers, if they were working off the numbers and then kind of backing into that information relative to their neighborhood, their community of interest?
Yes, we've often been asked that question, and I will answer it again here. Over the years, courts have ruled that local jurisdictions have some flexibility, and they have the ability to deviate by a total of 10%. That means that plus 5% or minus 5%, 5% overpopulation or 5% underpopulation is the maximum that most courts have allowed. We recommend to all of our clients that they try to keep that down to 1 or 2%. So and that's total deviation. So then you can say, if somebody comes up and says, well, this doesn't represent equal population, a 5 plus 5 or minus 5, then we could say, well, yeah, you're correct. We deviate only by 1% or 2%, which in relative terms is minor, but still gives us flexibility if we need it to shift lines around within an equal population standard and comply with some of the other criteria that I mentioned, like keeping a city together or something like that. So again, it's flexible, but we recommend that you not go much past 1 or 2% so that you can say, when somebody comes up and says this is not meeting the #1 challenge, we are as close as we can get.
So it sounds like with equal population being that main goal, but we could deviate to consider some of those other things that we talked about, communities of interest or keeping a city together, or even possibly some of those other traditional redistricting principles you mentioned if needed. But the goal is equal population, and then if we deviate based on the requirements.
Right, and
of the fair.
and any deviation should be something that can be easily explained.
And I think documentation from what the community presents is having that available would help
Absolutely.
to justify any deviation.
Absolutely.
So that becomes really important. Yeah, great question. Okay, so the community of interest form is one way to participate. We also have some really cool mapping tool options as well. So we're going to play a short video on those options, and we also have some, for those that are here in person, we have some laptops in the back, and we welcome you after the workshop to play around on those laptops while we have Doug the pro here. So please feel free to stick around after if you wanted to learn more about those mapping tools. So we'll go ahead and play the video.
How to submit maps for redistricting. There is a map submission tool for every level of experience and interest, from simple paper maps that you just draw on to complex technical maps with lots of data layers and online submission. Let's discuss which tools are right for you. Step 1. Get informed. Learn more about your district, neighborhood, or community of interest. Resources are available to you in easy-to-read informational maps. They provide population, demographic, and geographical information by using estimated 2020 census data. The story map includes a wide array of geographic and demographic data arranged like a PowerPoint presentation. These simple maps are interactive as you step your way through them to see details about districts and tracts. They can be a great reference for you when you tell your community story to the county. As public map submissions become available, they will be added to the story map as well. The interactive review map is a powerful tool, packed full of layered data such as population, demographics, citizen voting age, and various council and service plan boundaries. Once the redistricting draft maps are ready for release in November of 2021, they'll be added as layers to this tool as well. Step 2. Draw a map. After learning more about the tools and resources available to you, choose a mapping tool and method that works best for you. Simple paper maps are available in 2 formats: estimated population data and city, freeways, and census-designated places data. These simple one-page printable maps can be drawn on and notated, then submitted to the county for consideration. There is also a Microsoft Excel supplemental file available to help calculate the populations if you prefer. Powerful online mapping tools provide greater detail and more layers and features when drawing your districts, neighborhoods, and communities of interest. These tools allow users to save and submit their maps to the county online. The District R Online Mapping Tool is a simple online paintbrush tool that allows you to paint your neighborhood, your community of interest, or a full countywide district map. You can select areas to include in your map, erase unwanted areas, mark important places and landmarks, and add comments to describe your map. The most powerful mapping tool is the Caliper Maptitude online tool. This tool enables you to draw districts by census block with all the demographic data used by the county's demographic consultants. You can fine-tune your district lines and see, in detail, the resulting demographics as you draw your map. This tool requires users to create a free online account. You can use the tool to edit existing district boundaries or draw entirely new ones. The tool provides population counts and demographics of the districts you draw to show the impacts of moving the lines. You can see in real time how your proposed map lines would impact districts. The county redistricting website has some short user training videos that explain the features and steps needed to create, save, and submit your maps. We encourage you to review them. Step 3. Submit your map. If you chose an online option, then you can simply submit through the online tool. Or, if you prefer, you may also print and send to the county by email, mail, or drop it off in person. If you chose the paper-only option, you have the same options to email, mail, or drop off in person. For email, please send to redistricting@saccounty.net. To submit by mail or to drop it off in person, please send to Clerk of the Board, Attention, Redistricting, 700 H Street, Suite 2450, Sacramento, California, 95814. Please note that all submissions are part of the public record and will be posted in their entirety to the public comments webpage. For more information on the redistricting process and what you can do to participate, please visit the website redistricting2021.saccounty.net.
Great. Wonderful overview of the different options on how to participate. So that's really exciting. And now we want to go ahead and open it up to questions. But before we open it up to the public, Supervisor, did you have any other questions at this time?
Nope, I'm going to hear from folks. Thanks.
All right, yeah, let's get to the good stuff. All right, so we're going to go ahead and open it up for public comment or questions. Again, this can be very conversational. We want this to be engaging. We want to hear from you. So please feel free to participate. I already see we have a few questions through Zoom. If you want to participate by phone, please call 916-875-2500 and choose option 1 to be placed into the queue. But let's start with in-person questions first. If anyone here in our audience has any questions, feedback, or would like to go ahead and use this opportunity to provide public testimony, we do have a microphone at the front here. If you'd be so inclined to use the microphone, then we welcome you to go ahead and come up at this time. Would you like to come up?
Question, Chair, for Doug, to clarify, you said you could anticipate growth in a particular district. Does that still, how do you do that and still stay within your 1 to 2% deviation?
Very good question, and it's not easy. You can, I'll just use an example. We all know that Folsom has planned their growth for south of the river, and it's anticipated that hundreds of homes are going to be built there. and that people will move into them. That's currently a part of District, let me get this right, 4.
Yes.
So you could say, okay, we're gonna assume that there's 1,000 more people that are gonna move in here, so we'll underpopulate that district by, say, 1,000 folks. That's within your 1%. So then we can decide, okay, and then District 5, let's say, we will underpopulate it by 1,000 people. We will overpopulate it by 1,000 people because it's not going to grow. But that's not true because we all know that District 5 is going to grow as well. So it's something you can take into consideration. But again, as I said earlier, you don't want to go overboard because you do have to stay within the parameters of having an equal population for each district.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Anyone else have any other questions from our audience or any public testimony about your community of interest or neighborhood or city? No? Okay, then I will go ahead and move to the phone and check with our wonderful clerk of the board. Flo, has anyone called in?
We did not have any public comments at this time. We haven't received any written public comments either.
Great, thank you so much, Flo, I appreciate it. We do have some that have submitted comments and questions through the Zoom Q&A, kind of just talking about the deviation, and I just have to, it wasn't a question, but my girl Lauren Hammond said, I think Dawn knows 1% deviation is a nice goal, but not possible. So thanks, Lauren. Okay, so we do have a question. Yeah, we can all have goals, right?
Yes, we can have a goal.
So we do have actually some pretty good questions in here, and again, encourage folks to still have the opportunity to call in or submit more. The first question I have from one of our participants is Gold River being included in District 4 in the current district boundaries an example of a district that is not compact? That doesn't seem like it complies with that criteria. Interesting.
Very interesting question.
Yeah.
Back, and 10 years ago when that district was drawn, there were no standards as to what counties could do when they drew districts. Now there are. The Fair Maps Act was enacted in 2019 by the legislature and the governor. So there are, I would say, stricter standards now. That's something that we would have to take into consideration when we draw these districts as to whether or not Gold River is included in one district or another. We'd love to hear from the public as to what their opinions of where it should be. We'd like to hear from folks in Gold River and from all over the county. Wherever someone has a concern, it's open season. Please go to the website, send us an email, or come up at one of these forums and say, I think this should be that. Mm-hmm. That's what we're encouraging you to do, and that's what we'd like to hear.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point that you made, is that the rules, so to speak, of redistricting have changed, and that's to make sure that it is done in a fair and equitable way. So there is more rules and regulations than there were 10 years ago, and again, more public participation, which is a very important element as well. Another question we have is, what constitutes a business district? That's it. So yeah, so are businesses considered a community of interest?
Absolutely. Industrial areas, local shopping areas, a mall or something like that. It could be a community of interest. In other words, the business people there have an interest in being able to communicate with a supervisor, and if you divide that community, then they have to communicate with more than one, and perhaps they don't want it that way. There are other communities, I can think of one in Southern California, that specifically came in and requested that they be divided so they could have a voice in more than one. On their city council, they could have a voice with more than one council person. So it's entirely up to that community. If Lincoln Hills, Sun City thinks that they are so big that they don't like just talking to one supervisor, that they should be able to talk to two, then they should come to the community meeting and say, we think that our community is so large that you can divide us, and we'll still have enough influence with our supervisor that that's the way we'd like it to go. But it could be something else. Some other community could say, we would like to be together in one district because we're used to working with one supervisor, and we'd like to talk to that one supervisor to get our concerns taken care of. So it's entirely up to that community as to how they'd like to be considered.
Yeah, that's that's great feedback. And I'm just remembering my grandparents used to live on Klamath River in Rancho Cordova, and just kind of the back and forth. And I remember this discussions in terms of representation between Rancho Cordova and Gold River, and then kind of even going into the Rosemont area, or where we are right now in the 95827. And sometimes it can be confusing too, where it's like, wait, you have a different representative? So again, I appreciate the more we do in terms of outreach and knowing why it's important to know who your representative is and how to contact them for the important services that are provided.
And those kind of considerations are excellent for the Community of Interest Forum. If you don't want to come out in public and say it, just write it down and send it to us, and we will consider it.
Great. We have another question coming in, so, great. Yeah, we have a pretty large virtual participants, so that's great. Question, and a question that we do hear quite a bit, is voter registration considered when drawing district lines?
No.
All right.
Our database will not include any voter or political information. No voter registration, no election results, no nothing. When I was at the state, I would use that data when we would draw districts, and the state commission uses that data in order to consider not only community of interest but Voting Rights Act issues. But we in the county of Sacramento will not use that data.
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to where you said that data can't even be considered, and so you don't even have the access to even look at how political parties are divvied up throughout the county.
None.
Great.
Doug, is that based not just in more recent law, but because counties have, by design anyway, the supervisor seats are nonpartisan, even though people may have a political stripe that be identified readily, but
I think that policy is definitely based on that
Yeah.
consideration, in that city councils, board of supervisors, school boards are not elected on partisan basis.
Right.
So why would you draw them using partisan data? Doesn't make any sense.
I didn't think about that side of it. Yeah, that does make sense. And yeah, it's important to know, right, that the Fair Maps Act really applies to our counties and our cities throughout the state. Cities can opt to have their own redistricting commission or other advisory commissions. But otherwise, they do have to meet, unless there's a special charter, they do have to meet that criteria of the Fair Maps Act. And like you said, nonpartisan offices. So yeah, didn't even think about that side of it. Okay, this one, it looks like it's just a public testimony, so I'm going to go ahead and just read it out loud. The urbanized area south of the American River and outside the city of Sacramento should be kept together as one large community, from Rosemont to Gold River with Rancho Cordova. Okay. And then a question. Is it possible to keep the old Cordova planning area together? It was planned together, and they are linked by Highway 50 as one contiguous suburban area.
The answer to the question is yes, it's possible to be kept together. But if you want us to make sure that we know not to split it up, then please fill out a community of interest form or simply send us an email on redistricting@saccounty.net and define what the community is. Give me a boundary so that I can see it, and I can make sure that I don't draw a line down the middle of it inadvertently.
And I think that's important, we know well, Supervisor Natoli, I'm pretty sure knows every house in his district.
No,
You obviously, Doug, you live in the county, you have an idea of the county.
he lives in my district.
Yeah, that's your constituent.
25 years.
And I've been doing, voter registration work with Precinct Boundaries for 17 years. So, we have an idea of what our county looks like, but things like the Cordova planning and some of maybe those more of those planning communities, or urban development or suburban development, those are things we really want to know, because it's like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that, or what the history is, or what it means for the community. So that's where it's really important to hear from that community, because while, again, we have knowledge of our surrounding community, we might not have that much knowledge.
Right. We hear about these things all the time. Old Fair Oaks, Old Elk Grove. Yeah.
Yeah.
We think we might know where they are, but I couldn't give you the definite boundary.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody has one, please tell us what it is.
Yeah.
So we can make sure we know.
Ooh, I kind of have a good. Oh, this one's a good question. What happens if the board can't agree on a final map?
Oh, very simple.
Oh.
The Fair Maps Act has taken that into consideration. They put the December 15th deadline in there so that counties would be ready to have elections in June of 2022. But they said if a county is not completed with their process by December 15th, it requires that county to file an action with the Superior Court, and the Superior Court will decide what entity would draw districts and when that would be completed. In other words, if the county can't come together by December 15th, they're required to ask the court to do it for them.
Doug, can you speak a little bit to the fact that, the board is obviously going to have some pretty big decisions to make in order to meet the requirements. How, as our consultants, how are you going to work to kind of combine the community of interest forms, the proposed maps together? How are you going to combine all that to come up with some possible proposals for our board to consider?
What I will do is I will take all the community input that we have received, try to consolidate it in some way to figure out if there's some similar comments or if there are different comments coming from the same area, and pointing out those differences to the board. And then our online tools are available so that folks can draw maps of what they think their neighborhoods are. There are also tools available where you can draw all 5 district plans, and then I will look at all of those that come in and try to either similarize them or point out the differences. And then, just using all of the input I can find, figure out where District 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 goes, perhaps starting from the current districts and just making adjustments, and then taking public comments into consideration. Like somebody might say, land park needs to be united instead of divided. And then hopefully they will give me a definition of what land park is, what the land park neighborhood or community is, and then I can adjust and adjust that so that it's united rather than divided. And then move on to District 2, 3, and 4. Take all those comments into consideration and come up with a map that I'll show to Mr. Natoli and his colleagues, and they'll say, "That's great. This is great. Let's do this." Or they'll say, "Yoakum, where did you come up with this?"
Start over.
Start over.
I've been in this business for 40 years. I've been drawing districts for state legislators all that time, and I have had both reactions, believe me.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Well, it'll be interesting to see what you come up with. We have another question that came in through the Q&A feature. How many racial designations will the county use? For example, white alone, black alone, Hispanic, Asian, Pacific Islander. How do we get that demographic information, and how will we use it?
That demographic information comes from the census. It will be on the online tools that you'll see that are available, and it runs the gamut. All of those that you read off are mentioned, but there's a Hispanic designation that you put on the census, and the census provides that data to us. Then people who are not Hispanic are categorized as non-Hispanic whites, non-Hispanic black, non-Hispanic Asian, or Pacific Islanders. All of those are on the census data that you'll see. And that's what we use to consider and make sure that we're not dividing a community or combining them in a way that takes away their influence in a district, or combining them in a way that we can make sure that their influence is considered in a district.
And our mapping tools do have a lot of different demographic data, right?
All of the demographic data that's available on the census will be on the mapping tools, yes.
Got it. Okay, thank you. All right, another question. You guys are rocking it tonight. Okay. Can the public comment on those submitted maps before they are adopted? So yeah, Doug, do you want to kind of talk about the hearing process and kind of how that time is going to be important for the board to hear from the public?
Right. As would any item that comes before the Board of Supervisors, it's open. It has a public hearing. It's open to all members of the public. We will go over what the proposal is, and then the board will say, okay, is there anybody here who would like to comment on what we just went over on the map? And the map will have been posted 7 days prior to the hearing, so all the maps will be able to be seen by the public, and the public will be able to comment on them not only at the hearing but before the hearing. So we'll have all those comments online, and then the board, like I said, will either make a decision and say we're going in this direction, or say, okay, let's take this item and change that a little bit. They will give me direction as to what to do before the next hearing, which is, again, will be public and will be open to all, and testimony will again be asked for and taken into consideration before the final adoption of any plan.
Great. I actually have a question for the supervisor. Supervisor, why do you feel it is important to keep communities together?
Well, I think it's a combination of reasons, but I think firstly, and it goes back to some of the things that are embedded in direction here this evening, that communities are not just in name, they're constituted of people that have chosen to live in that community, or chosen to work in that community, or have affiliations, whether it be family ties, whether it be ties to schools, to other interests. And I think that those are commonalities that, one, obviously are undertaken in consideration of boundaries, but they're real. And so whether folks have chosen to incorporate, or they've chosen to live in a particular community for whatever reason, I think it's really important that that be given, not just fair consideration, but that be taken into account when we're looking at boundaries. And again, as I've listened, and certainly this is a presentation that I've heard a couple times as it relates to the data that goes into one, drawing proposals, but secondly, and probably foremostly, ultimately when it comes to the board for some decision, that we look at those communities and the people that have certainly weighed in, but that they may very well be reflecting similar comments from folks in those communities. And so, again, having had a bit of experience, not with the Fair Map Acts as being some of the overriding guidance, but there has been, again, in my experience, certainly as a member of the board over many years, that, looking at communities, geography, but certainly where people work together, they've raised their families, like I said, they work in places, shop, whatever it might be, things that tie people together. And I think, some of the other political boundaries that relate to park districts and fire districts and school districts, other municipal districts, those are important because they have not just elected officials, but that's a commonality of oftentimes tax resources, but certainly of the benefits that come, whatever those amenities are. So, there's a variety of reasons, but I think it's very, very important, and that's why hearings like this evening and certainly leading up to an array of maps that we'll see here in a couple of months, it's very important to hear from folks here this evening, but as people go home and think about it, talk with their neighbors. And I know in the scheme of things, when all that goes on in people's lives, and certainly in our busy world, this may seem, a bit less important, but it really is important because it goes to not only representation, but decisions that are made about your tax dollars, about community resources, about decisions that relate to planning, to improvements in your community, and a variety of things. And so that representation is very, very important. Certainly, I know but my colleagues take our representation very seriously, and it goes back to the communities and the areas that we represent, both geographically, but as a county as a whole. So again, I can't stress the importance of what we're talking about here this evening or overstate it. And again, I would just hope that folks would, as they think about it, give us input. And I know some of the folks here in the audience have weighed in years past, and it certainly has had, that and a lot of other inputs had an impact upon how we've ultimately arrived at boundaries and recognizing the guidance that we have in law.
Mm-hmm. That's a great response. And touching on an important aspect there about, you're right, with kind of the overlapping boundaries that we have, whether it's park districts, school districts, and it reminds me of what came up in our District 2 workshop, where we're talking about the Vineyard area actually, and how a lot of the residents in the Vineyard area will either go to school or get other services in the Elk Grove area. So again, you're kind of where you live, you might be represented by one supervisor, but where your kids go to school or where you might participate in other community activities might be another one. So, and would want to know why that works or doesn't work for you. So that's a great question. Okay, so it looks like we will go ahead and do one more round to make sure folks all had an opportunity. So I'll ask again. Yeah, great. We have a in-person public comment.
Will public access to these mapping tools be available after the December 15th deadline?
Ooh, yes.
Yes. Again, the state has taken care of that issue too. It requires the county and all entities in California to keep records of what happened during redistricting, all of the comments, all of that stuff, all the maps, keep it on file for 10 years and available online.
That's a great question, and that's something that, so you mentioned the fair maps, that's a new requirement?
That is a new requirement.
Okay. I think that's important, and I know too we received a lot of questions to get past maps that we've actually just added to our website for past boundaries to kind of see how it's changed and morphed over the years. So that's a great question. Great. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, the mic. Yeah. The question was regarding how long after the December 15th deadline are we required to keep, or will the mapping and public comments and all that be available after the December 15th deadline? Thanks, Mike. Yeah, so, and
the answer is 10 years.
10 years. 10 years and having a record of it, well, let's face it, once it's online, it'll never go away. So, okay. Great, thank you. Yeah, forever. Any other questions from our in-person participants? Okay, thanks. And Flo, I'm going to go ahead and check with you one more time to see if anyone is on the phones.
And we do not have any public comments at this time.
Okay, thank you so much for checking. Okay, and it looks like I don't see any more questions coming in through the question and answer field of Zoom. So Supervisor, I'm going to ask, do you have any remaining questions or things we need to look at or consider as we move forward?
No, I just would note that, again, there's a couple more workshops yet to come in this format. I know another one in the district, and certainly geography of District 5 is large. You probably could have 3 or 4 of these hearings, but I think the idea is that this is up on the web. Word has been put out relative to the availability and accessibility of the mapping tools, and we just encourage folks to, as they have this evening, to, again, participate as time allows, give us some thought, and it will be important. I can state very affirmatively, it'll be very important to the considerations that the board will take up as this process rolls out over the next couple of months. But I want to, again, just thank the folks that were here this evening, those that participated online or over the phone. And thank you, Courtney and Doug, and certainly all of our staff that made all of this possible, including clerk of the board and all the voter registration and IT staff. I see David Villanueva here, who oversees our internal services agency, and I know this takes a lot to set this up. But bottom line is, it is important, and once the boundaries are set, they are for the 10-year period. And this is a real opportunity for people to participate and to hopefully have good, solid input into an important decision for a variety of reasons that I already touched on. And thanks for all for being here this evening. And what I just wanted to add, you did say that there's an opportunity after we adjourn this session, though, for folks to talk with Doug, myself, obviously Courtney, others that are here. I would just acknowledge my chief of staff, Rebecca Sloan's here as well, and certainly a good point of contact with my office this evening, but going forward. But people can use computers, and maybe we're going to cover that, but you can, see the tools if you wanted to see them if you don't have access to them immediately at home. So again, thanks for all that.
I'd be happy to demonstrate any of the tools that are online right now.
Thank you, Supervisor. And we did get one more comment through or question through Zoom that I do want to ask, because this has come up, and this has also come up through kind of talking about age as well. But the question is, can you submit comments and suggestions if you aren't a citizen?
Yes, sure.
Great.
We'll take comments from anyone.
And I received a similar question regarding, can someone under 18 also submit comments? And it's like,
Absolutely.
yes. Yeah, so we want to make sure, sometimes we might have, someone who's 12 years old might be able to give the best idea of a community of interest or boundaries.
The census was supposed to count everybody in the county. And the reason we count everybody in a census is to figure out how many people there are so we can draw districts. And so all of those people can be represented. Yeah. There was an issue with the census regarding citizenship. It was settled. And so everybody was encouraged to respond to the census. And they were, this county and all the local entities made efforts to try to get people to respond. And so that's how we ended up with the count that we have. And we will then use that to draw districts so that all of those people will be represented.
Courtney, can I just ask a question of Doug, because I know it's come up in past redistricting discussions. Because we have a state prison here in Sacramento County, obviously it's in the city of Folsom, how's the population within the prison setting accounted for in both the census but also in the redistricting process?
Yes. Folsom is a client of National Demographic Corporation, but what happened was, and this was before the Fair Maps Act, the legislature enacted a law that said that the Department of Corrections shall provide to the statewide database a list of people who are incarcerated and the address that incarcerated person was from prior to their incarceration. And the reason to do that was so that the statewide database can reallocate the population of all prisons in California back to the community where those inmates came from. So if the inmate came from Los Angeles, that will be located in a census block somewhere in Los Angeles. If the Folsom inmate came from Citrus Heights, then that person will be located in Citrus Heights. When we go on these mapping tools and go to the Folsom prison and click on it, it will be 0. There will be a 0 number there because all of those people will have been allocated back to where they came from. San Francisco, Los Angeles, whatever. They just announced that they will do the same for federal prisons, whereas they will not reallocate the people because they don't have the data from where they came from. But if you click on a federal prison, say Lompoc, on a redistricting program like we have here, that block will also be zero. There are no people in the prisons as far as redistricting is concerned.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Yeah, that's a change. I mean, years ago, the prison population used to be counted in whatever that jurisdiction was, but now it's.
That's correct. And that's not the case anymore, and it's the case in other states, but in this state, all prison population will have been allocated back to their home that they came from.
And I've heard comments and concerns about that it's somehow trying to kind of change the rules and manipulate the data, but this is before Fair Maps Act. When was this changed?
My recollection is that the law passed in 2014.
Okay.
Don't quote me on that, because I was there, but
In prison or?
It was,
oh, okay.
no, I was in the legislature.
Just kidding.
I was the staff person to the legislature, and I witnessed the debate for that bill, but I can't recall what year it was. I think it was 2014.
The point being, it's been a few years. I mean, it
it's been a
wasn't
few
something
years.
changed last minute. Yes, sir.
How about for students away at college?
The question was,
From home address or?
good
The
question.
census on April 1st counts you where you are. Therefore, and this is another interesting little thing that's going on, and went on prior to the release of this data that we had last week. You may recall that April 1st of 2020 was maybe 6 weeks after the pandemic started. And I can tell you this from personal experience. My daughter was in college, and on April 1st, there was nobody at Sonoma State. Nobody was there. So what has happened is that the Census Bureau, in cooperation with local agencies, have made estimates as to dorm populations. And so they actually placed some people back in these dorms that were supposed to be there on April 1st, but weren't there for various reasons. So there will be, when we look at a block that has a dorm at Sac State, there will be people there, even though perhaps on April 1st there may not have been. But it's called the imputation process back at the Census Bureau, and we don't have time to go into how they do it. It's quite complicated.
Wow. Yeah.
That's curious, though. So you do it for colleges, but you don't do it for prisons. Not that there's any analogy between the two institutions, but it's just that.
In California, the prisons are required to be treated in a certain way now. But the Census Bureau, when it's called, dormitories at colleges are called group quarters. They have procedures that decide how to count group quarters.
What if you have military facilities where folks are
Another group quarter. If 10,000 people at Pendleton were deployed on April 1st in some place, the military will inform the Census Bureau of that, and the Census Bureau will impute 10,000 people into that military base.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I didn't even, yeah, that was a great question. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, great. I'm glad you brought that up about with college students away. Thank you. Okay, great. Well, again, as the supervisor mentioned, we are going to be around to make sure that you have an opportunity to use the mapping tools if you would like. This video, along with all other district workshops, are going to be posted to the redistricting website, redistricting2021.saccounty.net. So you're able to view this or share with anyone as well, and this, again, will be part of the public record. As the supervisor also mentioned, we are going to have another workshop in District 5. We will have a District 1 workshop on September 20th, and then we are still working on a date for the other District 5 workshop somewhere around the Elk Grove area. So there will still be future workshops, and also, again, it'll be very important to watch those hearings when they go live. So if there are no other questions, we can go ahead and say thank you all for your participation. Thank you to the Rancho Cordova Library for allowing us to use this space, our wonderful Department of Technology, and all of our community partners and participants. And of course, the man, the myth, the legend, Supervisor Natoli and Doug, for your time tonight. So thank you all. Have a great night, and we'll see you at the next workshop. Thank you.